Wednesday afternoon to you. It's 4 o'clock in time for Sports4CLE. Thanks for joining us. Hope you're having a good afternoon. Sports Illustrated's Albert Breer talking about the Browns potentially adding a quarterback in the NFL draft.
I really like the idea of it because I always think it's a good investment to swing if you've got, disposable picks and you've got like a little bit of, you feel like some currency there and somebody falls and you're in the 4th or 5th round and okay, like now we're in the range where, like the numbers show you like the guy you draft might not be on your team in 2 years, so I never mind taking a swing at quarterback in those situations, even if you have one. Ron Wolf used to do it in Green Bay over and over and over again, even when he had Brett Favre. So like, do you roll the dice with the Arkansas kid, Talon Green? Do you roll the dice with Drew Aller and everything that, and look at everything that happened with him at Penn State and say, there's still something to work with there. I think those sorts of things, the beauty of doing that to me is you're taking a swing and it doesn't take you off the market from taking one the next year. Like if you take one at 6 or 24, chances are you're not taking another quarterback next year, right? Or the year after that. If you take one in the 3rd or the 4th or the 5th round, you can very easily just turn around and take another one the next year. So in that way, it's almost a free shot where you're not taking yourself off the market to try to get an answer long term. But, maybe you are, getting a chance to look at a guy with some upside.
Again, notice he said 3rd, 4th, or 5th round. The Browns took Dylan Gabriel in the 3rd round, Shedeur Sanders in the 5th round. So interesting thought. At the NFL owners meeting, Todd Monken, his thoughts on second-year tight end Harold Fannin and what he can do.
His body type is more of an H and F, run after catch, more than length, more as a C-gap blocking Y. So you love his athleticism. You like his ability to run after catch, his ball skills like Brock, very similar in that regard.
Referring to Brock Bowers, Todd Monken knows what to do with a guy that can line up and catch the ball like Harold Fannin. Nick Baumgartner of The Athletic, talking about an offensive line prospect that the Browns being tied to a little bit, Caden Proctor from Alabama.
I just think he's more of a hip bender than a knee bender. Do you see that kind of carrying over to the NFL? His inability at that size to kind of bend at the knees and make sure he's able to get to the edge on those guys?
Yeah, it's not just that. It's also the hands are all over the place. He guesses a lot. He lunges a lot. He's just a very sloppy player, I think, in general. And it's hard to say that because he's such a good athlete. I mean, he is very special. All the stuff that they've done with him in the backfield and splitting him out and all that. I mean, he's legitimate. He can move and he can deliver a blow on the move. And if he can get with a good offensive line coach or whatever, then it would be great. It could be great. But it's also one of these things where it's like he's a third-year college player. He started for 3 years. The NFL is not a developmental league. I have a lot of questions about him. And, for me, I'd be nervous about him in the 20s if I was a team that wanted to take him and have him start immediately. I almost feel like I'd rather have him sit behind a guy. Like I've seen Detroit, as a situation where they have a swing tackle along with Sewell. They could bring a guy in, maybe sit him for a little bit. Like that, maybe that would work there. But I'm not sure if it would work with Cleveland, especially if you're a young team trying to come up on it, because I think Proctor's a guy that's going to need a lot of work.
Well, that's an interesting development relative to Caden Proctor. All right, we'll have plenty of Browns talk coming up. Sam Monson from the 33rd team, as well as Fred Greetham in a little bit. All right, let's turn our attention to the Cavs. Cavs out west, taking on the Lakers last night. Lakers coming in having, won 12 of their last 13. First quarter, Luka Doncic going crazy. Gets the bucket off of the drive. A lot of Luka Doncic is what the Cavs saw. Step back, that one's a 3. Luka Doncic again, this time the second quarter. 3 more. Lakers open up an 8-point lead. How about 3 more for Luka Doncic? Didn't get the foul call, doesn't matter, hits another 3-pointer. He had 42 points, 13 of 26 from the field. Lakers win it pretty easily, 127-113. Cavs still in 4th place in the Eastern Conference, a game behind the New York Knicks. They stay out west, where they will play the Golden State Warriors tomorrow night. Guardians also in Los Angeles. Game 2 of a 3-game series against the Dodgers last night. It was Shohei Ohtani facing the Tanner Bybee and the Guardians. And Chase DeLauder in the first fouls a ball off his foot. Finished the at-bat, left the game, had x-rays negative. DeLauder won't play in the series finale tonight. Ohtani, really good. Guardians had a lot of trouble with him. He went 6 innings, so a quality start. Gave up just 1 hit, no earned runs, 6 strikeouts, and 3 walks. 4th inning, scoreless game. Andy Pages at the plate for the Dodgers. He goes the other way, and it's trouble. A base hit brings in a run, 1-0 Dodgers. 5th inning, Dodgers at it again. Actually, 6th inning, Dodgers at it again. Max Muncy, this one leaves the yard. Solo home run, 2-0 Dodgers. And the 8th inning, a runner on. Teoscar Hernandez at the plate. That one's going to bring a run in. 3-0 Dodgers with the lead. And again, it's Pages in the 8th. And that one, he turns on it, an RBI single to make it 4-0. The Guardians did score a run in the 9th inning, but they lose it 4-1. Series wraps up tonight. Gavin Williams against Yamamoto for the Dodgers. Then it's the home opener Friday against the Cubs. We're going to step aside, take a quick timeout. Browns are up first. Sam Monson from the Check the Mic podcast. We're talking Browns after this timeout. Stay with us.
You got so much to do. It's got you feeling blue. Put a little play in your day. 'Cause it's fun all over the state. So come on. Great games wait for you and me. The Ohio Lottery. Put a little play in your day. Put a little play in your day.
Browns are up first on Sports4CLE. Albert Breer from Sports Illustrated, Monday morning quarterback, with his case for the Browns trading Miles Garrett after reworking his contract.
I look at timelines here, and I look at like where he is, and so like let's say that the Browns knock it out of the park again this year in the draft, and so now you've got Carson Schlesinger and Nathan Graham and Harold Fannin and Quinshon Judkins from this year, and then or from last year, and then this year you get 4 or 5 guys who are good contributors, and then next year you get the quarterback, right? So like that would like line up like, man, it's all starting to come together now. And you'd be talking about, okay, 27, like, you've got a shot to maybe contend with a young quarterback, like be a relevant team. And then 28's the breakthrough, right? At that point, Miles Garrett is going to be 32, turning 33 at the end of that year. So do the timelines match up? And that's like my question, or would you be better off getting 2 or 3 first-round picks for him and really juicing your rebuild? I know it'd be hard to walk away from Miles Garrett. I get that. It's always hard to trade a player of that magnitude away. But the way I look at it, it could be for the Browns sort of if you want to look back at it, what the Seahawks trading Russell Wilson was. A lot of the basis of the Seahawks Super Bowl team this year was built in the back of that trade.
Let's welcome in Sam Monson from the 33rd team, co-host of the Check the Mic podcast. Sam, it's been a hot topic because the Browns did rework Miles Garrett's contract. There's a couple things that jump out. I get he's 30 years old. He also, at 30 years old, 29-30, set the NFL single-season sack record. And if you're trading him to a contender, those picks aren't going to be impact player-type picks. They're going to be in the 20s or 30s. Might be a decent player, but you trade him away, where are the impact players on this roster?
Yeah, and obviously because he has that no trade clause in his contract, he's going to be determining who he gets traded to, at least in some regards. So you're right; it's actively forcing those picks further down the first round relative to a different team that they could potentially trade him to, which is absolutely a factor. I think it's tough. I'm normally of the camp that says when you find a player like that, you don't trade them away, right? When the Vikings traded away Randy Moss, that's the type of player you don't trade away. The whole purpose of the draft, the whole purpose of talent acquisition is to find yourself one of these guys that is, the best player in the NFL at their position. Miles Garrett might be the best player, period, in football. Like, forget position, change or remove sort of value from the equation. He might be the best pure football player in the entire game, but we're now reaching this point where, he's 30 years old. He'll be 31 at the end of this season. And as Albert Breer was saying, it becomes about timelines. I think the Browns have been really unlucky because I think they played last year's draft well, trading into this year, pushing resources into the future, taking low-risk gambles on the quarterback position in Dylan Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders, thinking that this year they would have the 2 first-round picks. They would have expected, I think, at least one of those picks to be higher than it is, given the success that Jacksonville had right out of the gate. So they would have thought they had positioned themselves for, QB2 or QB3 in this draft. And unfortunately, the draft just didn't materialize that way. You've got Mendoza, and then you've got this debate about how good Ty Simpson is. But a lot of the players that people thought would be features of this draft simply aren't there, didn't have the seasons in college, went back to college, whatever it is. And so the Browns are looking at this, and then now they're probably another year away from finding the guy that they thought would be the answer quarterback. And that's another year of Miles Garrett pushing towards, the back half of his career. And I think you do need to start asking the question, like, how many years of the best player in the game do we have left with Miles Garrett? And at some point, that calculus becomes, are we better off trading him for as much as we can get him for?
Along those lines, how long do elite defensive edge rusher? It's not. I mean, it's not a light position. It's not like he's taking the beating of an offensive lineman, though. Do those guys play well into their mid-30s-ish?
I don't think there's a consistent answer to that. I mean, Bruce Smith, went deep into his 30s, and he lasted a long time and was still good by the end. There are some of the best ever players that lasted deep into their 30s, and today's NFL with today's modern medicine and sports nutrition and the way people look after their bodies, I think that's going to happen more and more. You look at some defensive tackles, some of the best defensive tackles in the game have been playing their best football the back half of once they clear 30, not before they get to 30. Guys like Calais Campbell and players like that, you're seeing a bunch of those players now. So I think you will start to see these guys aging well. But I don't think it's going to be universal, and there's definitely going to be players that still start that decline early into their 30s. And I just think it's a very difficult analysis for a team like the Browns to figure out when you're going to start to see the decline.
All right, so you kind of alluded to the Browns' quarterback situation. Albert Breer again, talking about the Browns' plan at quarterback.
I don't know why you would be so sure of any of them, where there wouldn't be a real competition, And so, look, I think there's a reason to want to get a look at Shedeur Sanders. There's a reason to want to get a look at Deshaun Watson. There's a reason to keep your options open, when you're going into the draft. And, do you want to take, one in the second or third round? Do you want to take a flyer on someone later? All those things are to be considered because I don't know. I just don't, I don't think there's a great chance that the quarterback of the future is on the roster right now. But you want to give everybody who's on the roster a shot to prove that wrong, And so, I think the best thing for the Browns right now is to open up the competition. And, it helps the new coach, too, in showing that, hey, if we're going to have, an open, fair competition at the most important place in the field, then, everybody else is going to have to compete for their spot as well.
And I think part of that, Sam, that is unstated, Todd Monken's 59 years old. This is his chance. He's going to go with the guy that gives him a chance to win. I know I would in his situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Monken has no sort of attachment to any of these guys previously. He's only in it for who the best quarterback right now. Who am I going to have the most success with right out of the gate? Because that's the only thing that matters to him. I don't think that's a clear, obvious answer right now. I mean, it could be a kind of resurgence from Deshaun Watson. It could be Shedeur Sanders taking a step forward in year 2. You could make the argument that either one of those guys in particular gives him the best chance to win. I think that's going to be his first task, is figuring out who is the best quarterback that he currently has.
All right, so along those lines, at the owners' meeting yesterday, Todd Monken talked about the quarterbacks and what he has seen from them in Berea since he's been head coach.
Well, it's too early to really evaluate him, other than it's been great that he's been in the building. It's refreshing to see a player that recognizes where he's at and where he wants to get to.
And Gabriel hasn't been in the building?
As far as I know, he has not. I have not seen Dylan yet. Deshaun was in early when I got the job, so I got a chance to sit down with him.
So, again, Sam, a lot of people are making something out of Dylan Gabriel not being in Berea. It's important to note he lives in Hawaii, so he's back home in Hawaii. Is there something to that, though? Again, if I'm a guy fighting for a spot, I want to be there, and I want to be noticed if I'm one of those rookie quarterbacks.
Yeah, it would be interesting to know kind of what the baseline is for quarterbacks throughout the NFL. You know, how many of those guys are around their team's facility in the offseason, like deep into the offseason. This is almost vacation season for NFL players versus how many of them go out of their way to hang around the facility. But the point you made is the right one, which is that job is A, up for grabs, B, there's a new head coach in the building who has no attachment to any of these guys. You know, it is an opportunity for you to put your hand up and just be noticed. And, you know, you're not going to win a job in April. You're not going to win a job in March. But you might catch the guy's notice. You might, you know, strike up a rapport with him, and you might start to change the perception a little bit. So, you know, if nothing else, I would say it is potentially a missed opportunity for Dylan Gabriel to keep himself relevant in what I think is becoming more and more like a two-person competition of, you know, the youth of Shedeur Sanders versus the kind of reclamation project of Deshaun Watson.
Okay, also from the owners' meetings, Todd Monken asked about his fondness for playing with two tight ends, so 12 personnel, which he did a lot with the Ravens.
Well, we were lucky enough at the place I was before to have a good number of tight ends. That also puts you in a position to use that personnel group. I wouldn't say we're going to be a 12 personnel group at 21 and 11 until we get out there and see what we have, till we get the draft completed, free agency completed, and see what we have. I think that's our job as coaches, is to utilize the players that we have. And we morphed a little bit last year with Isaiah Likely being hurt and Lamar being hurt to a little bit more 21 than we were even 12 the year before. So we'll see how it goes. I do think that the bigger you are, the calmer the looks.
You know, it's kind of interesting, Sam. I think that in a nutshell is one of the things that's appealing about Todd Monken. He tailors what his offense is to the skills that he has, which, I mean, that should by definition be coaching, but it's not always the case.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, generally it's an encouraging thing. It's a good sign. A coach that isn't, you know, married rigidly to this is our system, this is what we need, this is what we're going to be running. It's a guy who, yeah, maybe they like to run certain things more than other things, but they're going to take a look at the roster, and that's going to determine the best course of action for what this offense is going to look like, for the plays they want to run, for the personnel groups they want to exist in. You're right. That's the way you should be approaching things. So I think those are all good things to hear from Monken.
Sam Monson from the 33rd team, co-host of the Check the Mic podcast, and I are going to step aside to a quick timeout. Other side of the break, we'll talk a little bit about the draft. What will the Browns do at 6? Could it be tackle? Could it be wide receiver? Sports4CLE, be right back.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns and NFL football with Sam Monson from the 33rd team. He's also co-host of the Check the Mic podcast. A longtime Browns beat reporter Tony Grossi with an out-of-the-box thought for number 6 with the Browns. He's going running back with Jeremiah Love.
This guy's going to run the football, man. I'm not saying he's not going to have a good passing attack, but Tony, clearly you've got three good running backs, and your wide receiver room and quarterback room right now is not. I think it's a smart move, right?
Well, I believe it. It's old school football. He is old school football. Now, he's adapted. He ran the air raid offense way back at Oklahoma State when he was a coordinator there. So it's not like he's a fossil and won't change, but he's going to look at what his team can do best. What if Jeremiah Love is sitting there at number 6 for the Browns from Notre Dame, the alleged best player in the draft who happens to run the football? That's going to be interesting. It's now entering my mind, whereas I just said, no way. We'll see how that develops.
So, Sam, I guess I'm not in love with the idea, but I've been saying the Browns need playmakers on offense, and that guy it's different, but he's a playmaker.
He is. There's a lot of debate and a lot talked about where can you take a running back in today's draft? How high up can you draft a running back? To me, that flow chart begins with, is my offensive line good enough that this guy can immediately have the success that he needs to have, or does he need to overcome the offensive line to be that player? If the answer to that question is no, I don't have that offensive line, that's it. That's the end of the flow chart. You don't draft a running back at that spot. Only if the answer to that is yes, can you start getting into, all right, what other positions am I leaving, on the table? What is the surplus value we're getting here? Am I comfortable with the money we're going to be paying this guy right out of the gate? All those kinds of things. But I don't see how you can look at the Browns' offensive line right now and be confident that the answer to that first question is yes, we have the offensive line available for this guy to cook right away. There's no way you could be certain of that given the personnel they have up front, even with, the overhaul and the number of moves they made in free agency so far. So I don't think you can draft confidently Jeremiah Love, no matter how good he is, because it might look exactly the same as the Raiders a year ago with Ashton Genty, who was also, a special, phenomenal running back talent. And the Raiders took him, and that line didn't look terrible at the time. And it ended up being one of the worst offensive lines in the game. And every time Ashton Genty got the ball, there was a guy meeting him at the handoff, and there was just nothing he could do about it. So, if you wanted to look out of the box for the Browns, I would be asking things like, what if Reuben Bain is available at 6? Like, is that a position that you would address, even though it's not a critical need, because potentially Reuben Bain is that kind of special player? I think Jeremiah Love, I just don't think they have the infrastructure in place for him to be worth that pick.
So when you look at 6, do you lean towards tackle or wide receiver, just based on that? And they need a lot of help at both spots.
Yeah, and we've been gaming this out with mock drafts, on our podcast for weeks already. And honestly, I think either way works. We've done it several times where they take Carnell Tate with the 6th overall pick and come back later on the draft in the first round, and you can still get a tackle, that second wave of offensive tackles in the first round. Or you do it the other way around. You pick your favorite offensive tackle, whether it's Francis Maui-Noa, if you think he's a tackle rather than a guard, Monroe Freeling from Georgia, one of those guys, you make them the 6th overall pick, and then you come back and you can grab a wide receiver later in that first round. So I think, honestly, either way round works, and given the strengths of this draft, if they want to do it, I think the Browns will be able to come out of this draft with both a tackle and a wide receiver in the first round and be happy enough with the 2 players they got.
All right, so wide receiver, definitely an area that needs some upgrading. This is according to the Bleacher Report. Landing spots for Brandon Aiyuk, who basically the 49ers coaching staff and general manager has said isn't coming back. The owner was a little bit less than that, but they say Browns, Dolphins, Saints, Titans, Commanders as the landing spots. I guess the question I'm wondering your thoughts on, what can you realistically expect from Aiyuk? Again, it was a guy that wasn't happy playing with a team that's elite and hasn't played in a while.
Yeah, I mean, that's just a list of teams that need wide receiver help, but I actually think all of those spots are bad for Brandon Aiyuk because you can't rely on him anymore. I mean, this was a guy who got paid and then threw his toys out of the pram, down tools, and basically left the team. And it's one of the strangest, most unexplainable things that's happened in the last sort of 10 years in the NFL. I mean, at least with other players, you could kind of point to various things that set them off or that caused the problems. And sometimes, players act like that a little bit when they're trying to get paid, and that itself is ill-advised and doesn't tend to work out. Hassan Reddick tried to do that, basically down tools, held out, and a new agent had to come in and basically like, look, the only way you're getting any money out of this is to come back, show up to the team, try and be a good guy, and then let's try and work from there. So, Aiyuk cannot possibly be worth anything. Number one, a trade, and number two, financially, because no team can possibly be convinced that he's going to be there for any period of time and, keep his head on straight and dedicate himself to the cause. I think the landing spots for Brandon Aiyuk are the good teams that already have sort of established receiver rooms and can basically just burn a roster spot and say, it's a shot to nothing. If Brandon Aiyuk keeps himself together, we just brought a top 10 caliber wide receiver onto this roster for very little risk. And if he doesn't, we can get rid of him and we're still in a good shape. I think a team that actually needs him to be good next year just doesn't have the luxury of being able to bring him in.
As I listen to you describe that, I'm thinking the Philadelphia Eagles, if they trade A.J. Brown, is probably the landing spot that makes the most sense. This is also from the Bleacher Report. It's one free agent who can help every NFL team. For the Browns, they list Taylor Decker, tackle from the Lions, who didn't get to, they wanted him to take a pay cut in Detroit. He asked for and got his release. Posick for the Ravens, Bitonio for the Browns, and Kevin Zeitler for the Chargers, all guys who have a history playing the line here in Cleveland, other than Decker. What are your thoughts about Decker potentially being, they need a tackle. I'm guessing he's going to want some money to play if he's up to it physically.
Yeah, and he's definitely, getting towards the end of his career. It felt like the Lions were going to have to plan for the future at offensive tackle anyway and be like, we might have one more year of Taylor Decker, and we've got to start thinking about what life beyond him looks like. And apparently there were some, frank conversations between the two sides, and they decided to give him his release and let him walk away early. Last year wasn't a great year for him. I think he looked like he was on the way down. And if that's the start of the decline, he's 31 years old, I think. So heading into that area where you're always a little bit worried about, is this the beginning of the end? If that's the start, and then this year is going to be another step backwards and then another step, then he's still an upgrade, I think, for Cleveland, but it's definitely not a solution for more than a year, I would say. But if that was just a blip, and look, 31 is still young in the tooth relative to guys like Trent Williams, and maybe there's another 4 or 5 years of Taylor Decker out there, well, then, it is a potential upgrade and a solution for this team in the medium term. I would be, assuming that this is a short-term deal, but it might be worth bringing him in for 1 year just to try and solidify a spot.
Sam, as always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Sam Monson, make sure you check him out. Co-host of the Check the Mic podcast, 33rdteam.com as well. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. We continue talking Browns. Fred Greetham, senior analyst for the Orange and Brown Report, straight ahead. Stay with us.
You got so much to do, it's got you feeling blue. Put a little play in your day, 'cause it's fun all over the state. So come on, great games wait for you and me, the Ohio Lottery. Put a little play in your day. Put a little play in your day.
We continue talking Browns on Sports4CLE. Let's head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
I was listening to the Tom Munkin interview where he said that he won't divide the reps, which I absolutely love, because I feel like when we divided the reps with Joe Flacco and Shedeur Sanders, Dylan Gabriel, Kenny Pickett, we couldn't get an identity and the quarterbacks couldn't get in rhythm. If Todd can solidify the QB position before the preseason start, I believe we can get an offensive identity. We can stabilize that offensive identity.
As always, appreciate all of the voicemails. Let's welcome in Fred Greetham, senior analyst for the Orange and Brown Report. So, Fred, I know you wrote an article about quarterback reps and those kind of things. Take us through that and kind of your thoughts with it.
Well, as the listener or caller said, last year didn't work at all. I mean, they called it an open competition. You've always heard the line or phrase, if you have two quarterbacks, you don't really have any. To have four quarterbacks in an open competition is what they were trying to do. We all know Kenny Pickett was going to be the starting quarterback until he pulled the hamstring. And then he gets jettisoned pretty much when it got turned over to Joe Flacco. Well, then they go 4 games and pull the plug, and you had both veterans traded after 4 games, and the rest is history. You played Dylan Gabriel the next 6, and then you turned it over to Shedeur Sanders the last 7. So it really wasn't a competition. And I kind of agree with Todd Monken. I don't know how you can say, okay, Dave, you get 1 throw. Now you come in and you get 1 throw. There's variables all over the place with who's catching the balls, who's blocking, all those type things. So I just think, you're going to see enough of these guys. But as far as the snaps, from what he said, I think it was pretty clear. I'd be very surprised if Shedeur Sanders isn't the guy up with the first team, just because, he finished last season. That's what he said. And he said the way it finished last season, well, Shedeur Sanders was the starter, Deshaun Watson was on injured reserve, and Dylan Gabriel was on the bench. So I just don't really see any way. That doesn't mean it wouldn't change in a day or two. I fully expect it to change, but I kind of think by the time they get to training camp, they would be ready to name a starter and go, because I just think the longer it drags out, you're putting yourself in a position, to, as the caller said, not be ready for the regular season. And if you're really going to legitimately give Deshaun Watson a chance, I think, I understand why they say what they say publicly, but that really, I don't know what that does for you.
Yeah, I couldn't argue that thought. We'll talk about that in a minute. So you're referring to Jimmy Haslam saying he has a great opportunity with a new head coach. Longtime Browns beat reporter Tony Grossi on those comments that were made at the NFL owners' meetings.
The owner came out and said Deshaun Watson has a great chance to redeem himself. Is that, should I read it, that's a non-belief in Shedeur?
No, I wouldn't read it that way. I would read it in rewarding Watson for working hard to get through those 2 surgeries. And he has worked hard. Now that doesn't guarantee him playing. Now he's worked himself to the point where he's expected to be totally healthy. And he should, I thought Monken said it best. He was almost exasperated because he has felt the backlash of this Watson story. And he said, I don't understand it. He's on our roster. It's our job to make anyone on our roster give him a chance to be better.
I get that. And Todd Monken should be looking for a guy that can help him win football games, because if he doesn't win football games, we know he's not going to have the head coaching job of the Browns for very long. But to your point, Fred, if he goes out and plays well, are you going to extend him? Or are you going to sign him to another? I can't imagine that happening. The fan base is pretty much done with him, and I think he won't come out and say it, but I think he's pretty much done with Cleveland being Deshaun.
Yeah, it's I think most people turn the page. Maybe they're not sold on Shedeur Sanders, but thought, okay, they're turning the page. Let Sanders see what he can do. If he can be, middle of the road even this year, in the 15 to 20 range of NFL starting quarterbacks, okay, that could be, enough to lift this team to, near 500. But as far as, I don't know what you do for the future if Deshaun Watson does the same thing. You go 8-9, you don't make the playoffs, and now you have him walking, and then you have Shedeur Sanders with a blown season as far as not playing. Now, we all know, the Browns have went through 3, 4, 5 quarterbacks starting the last 3 years. So there's a good chance both of them will end up playing if they're both on the roster, if not all three of them, counting Dylan Gabriel. So I just think that they have to say things publicly, but I'd be very surprised if they go down that road. I mean, a year from swing and a miss to a fresh start, good chance to be the starter. Again, those first 2 days with Andrew Berry and Jimmy Haslam, I think they almost were too Deshaun Watson heavy in their quotes. And I think Todd Monken, whether he was realized that or whatever, he kind of went the other way and walked some of that back. Like, hey, he's on the roster. What do you expect me to do with him? You know, that isn't a glowing endorsement. And when he also said in there that he hasn't really looked at his tape. And I think part of that is because really you have to look 5-6 years ago to see legitimate the Deshaun Watson that the Browns traded for. And I don't know what good it would do to look at, you know, what he did in the last couple years. So, you know, with that being said, I think anything can happen, and it is a nice story, but I think that they have to say certain things. You can't say, well, I don't care if he's on the team. He's going to sit over in the corner. We're never going to talk to him. You know, you can't do that. And legitimately, I can see him be the veteran backup, and should ever goes down the first play, well, he'd probably be in the game. I doubt if they'd turn it to Dylan Gabriel. So I think he's probably going to look pretty good in training camp, but he's going to have to change, I think, from being the athletic phenom that he was in Houston to what he is now, post 2 Achilles tendon ruptures and a broken shoulder bone. So we'll see, but I think Todd Monken was a little more straight to the core. Hey, he's on the roster. We're going to see what he has. And if he's head and shoulders above Shedeur Sanders, that's gonna be a bad reflection on Sanders, and the Browns are going to have to play him if that's what it comes down to.
I would be stunned if Deshaun Watson doesn't look good in OTAs. He's probably done. You know, he's been around long enough. He should look good in those circumstances. I know you have some thoughts. All the Miles Garrett trade talk, it's kind of giving me a headache. What are your thoughts about the trade talk with Miles Garrett?
Well, I did a long drawn-out story and went into in-depth a couple days ago on the OBR.com. I mean, we have an expert on salary, he might have been on your show before, Jack Duffin, who, I mean, he just knows this stuff. And immediately, I have a show Wednesday night at 7 to 8, and he came on from London, where he lives, to say this means they're trading him. There is no reason not to do this move, because the next day the bonus was due and they couldn't trade him after the bonus was paid without an unbelievable cap hit. Well, so he said it went from no chance to being traded to 51% this year. Well, it still would be after June 1st to alleviate the cap hit to some degree. But, you know, the Browns have went way out of their way to explain that he's our guy and so forth. As far as all that, I think bottom line, it gave him flexibility. So if even after this season, you know, they realize, you know, he's our best asset in a trade, and maybe we can get ourselves in position to get the franchise quarterback. The theme of my story was, if you don't come out, if you trade Garrett, but he isn't a big piece or a reason that you were able to get the franchise quarterback, then it's a big waste, because you get the quarterback, but then you're starting basically all over on defense, because I don't care what anybody says, the defense isn't going to be number 1 or even top 10 without Miles Garrett, because opponents double, triple team him every game. We've heard that from Monken even when he was with Baltimore and other teams. So, and I even looked at that. What are you going to get? Everybody wants to trade. What if you got 3 first-round picks? I put it in the story and I did research. You go back, you know, just the last 3 years. There isn't a guy that anybody that's watching this video would trade Miles Garrett for. And if you got 3 first-round picks, Where you would be picking is probably 29 to 32 because he has a no trade clause, and he's not going to waive the no trade clause unless it's a Super Bowl contender. So that puts you at drafting at the end of the first round. So say you got 3 first-round picks between 29 and 32. I listed those guys in the story. You might, with hindsight, be able to find 3 pretty good players, but you wouldn't find one Miles Garrett. In fact, if you go back to 2017, TJ Watt was an exception. He was 30th, overall. But you can't trade Miles Garrett and say, with the 30th pick, we're going to get a TJ Watt. It's a lottery ticket. So I don't see what it accomplishes. The other explanation, personally, is that maybe Garrett's agent or Garrett himself, he's not going to still be happy the way he was last year. He got paid, check the box. That doesn't necessarily make you happy now that you got the money. So he still probably wants to win a Super Bowl. So he's saying, I know they can't trade me. Can you get him to put some language in that maybe we could get something done? And I could see the Browns appeasing him. Because from what Jack Duffin tells me, there really was no advantage at all to do this, other than for like 28, 29, or 30, I just think it gives them some flexibility if they change their mind somewhere between now and the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I'm with you. Relative to the, even the draft picks you get in 27, they're not going to allow you to move up enough to get the franchise quarterback that you think you're going to be able to get, because anybody that needs a quarterback is sticking at a high spot because the quarterbacks are supposed to be great in 27. Fred Greetham, go ahead.
Well, I just didn't know if the one other thing I went through there, and I ranked in my personal thing the 32 projected starting quarterbacks, and I don't think a team would trade Miles Garrett even up for anybody on that list until you got into the 20s. And a lot of those guys are like Cam Ward or Jackson Dart, or guys that might have a future, but they're not established, or they're on their way down. And so my point is the quarterback trumps all that. And so unless you trade your best piece and you get a franchise quarterback, what's the use in doing it?
I'm with you. Fred Greetham and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. We'll talk a little bit about the draft coming up. Sports for CLE. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Fred Greetham, senior analyst for the Orange and Brown Report. Albert Breer from Sports Illustrated talking about Ty Simpson and the Browns' potential interest in him.
I still think most NFL people see Ty Simpson as a second or a third round pick, and probably not somebody who can elevate to become a great quarterback in the NFL. But, I think the flip side of that is that, there's upside that maybe he could be Brock Purdy. And do you feel comfortable taking Brock Purdy in the first round if that's where the upside is? Brock's a really good quarterback, now he's got a really good team around him, but that's the sort of prospect you're looking at. So do I think that this is, an indication that they would consider him, at 24 or in the second round? Sure, because they have to consider all their options. I don't think it's a likelihood that Ty Simpson goes in the first round, but again, he can certainly win people over the next few weeks. And the tape is good. Everything you hear on him is like you just see him doing more NFL things on tape than you see from Fernando Mendoza, which isn't Mendoza's fault. It's just a little bit easier of a translation, with the acknowledgement that he probably doesn't have the upside that Mendoza does.
So, Fred, here's the thing. If you're going to take Ty Simpson in the second round, you'd probably be better off trading into the first round because you get the fifth-year option on a rookie quarterback, kind of like the Ravens did with Lamar Jackson. They traded back into the first round So they had the fifth-year rookie option on him. You don't get that in the second round. Again, he hadn't played enough games at quarterback. The number of guys that have played the number of games that Ty Simpson has and have had success, it's like one.
Yeah. It's the Browns have done, like I've said and written, they haven't made any moves that has been reported, doesn't mean they haven't, in trying to go after a veteran, established quarterback, whether a free agent like Malik Willis or Kyler Murray or Tua, or even try to get in on a trade like Geno Smith or whoever it may be. So that leads me to believe that they are kind of sticking with the three they have on the roster. The only question is the draft. And it's hard for me to believe with the needs they have. We've been harping on this about left tackle or at least a starting tackle with one of those picks and one or two wide receivers. Why you would, unless you're blown away and you think that Ty Simpson is your starting quarterback, I can't see him drafting him at 6. It's hard for me to believe they'd use even a 24. Now, if somebody like that, or Garrett Nussmeier, or Drew Aller, or Carson Beck, or whoever's out there, if you really have them ranked higher than what you have, you think that one of those guys, or Simpson, is better than Shedeur Sanders and or Deshaun Watson, well, then you draft him and you bring him in and he's your starter. But other than that, I don't know what you solve in this situation. I don't think he's exactly, I know Monken is adaptable, but I think all things being equal, you'd rather have a mobile quarterback with a little more mobility. But Andrew Berry plays games, with words. He kind of enjoys that. Last year, he led us to believe that they were taking Travis Hunter with the 2 pick, and there was really nowhere to fool anybody but one team that was ahead of them. So you kind of thought, okay, when you said, he's like Ohtani because there's only one of a kind, guys who play both positions, and then they trade the pick. So I don't know. I'm not going to say never. I'd be very surprised if they use one of their first-round picks on a quarterback.
So here,
and you can probably pencil that in.
Gut feeling: wide receiver or tackle, and which would you rather they do?
Well, I'm not the draft guru, but when you look at it, it seems to me, wide receiver to me, I have offensive tackle as the biggest need. Wide receiver, the second biggest need. But it looks to me, in my humble opinion, that there's more options at offensive tackle, after 6 than there are at wide receiver. It seems like a clear-cut dividing line in most rankings that you have 3 top-tier wide receivers. So I would think you'd take one of them, and then at 24, you might not get one of the top 3, but it looks like 4, 5, and 6 there could still start for you. So that's my preference. I wouldn't even be opposed to taking 2 wide receivers in the first round and then taking a starting tackle, at 39, because I think you can still get good offensive linemen in the 30s in the second round. I know a lot, like the Browns have had good success, got Joel Bitonio in the 30s, and Alex Mack, was a first-round pick. But other than tackles, maybe you got to take them in the first round for that 5th-year option. But it just seems to me that if you wait around, you might get a wide receiver with upside, but I don't know if you're getting a top-tier starting wide receiver to open the season. And so I really think they need, at wide receiver, offensive tackle, out of those first 3 picks as they stand, take 2 of them with your 3 picks and the other one, whether it's 2 tackles and a wide receiver or 2 wide receivers and a tackle. I think that's what you got to do.
I want him to take a wide receiver. I think this offense lacks playmakers. I think Harold Fannon's a nice player. Quinshon Judkins is a nice player. Jerry Jeudy's an okay player. I think if you give him a wide receiver that can, it creates more space for them all. I want a wide receiver at 6. If it's Tate, if it's Lemon, if it's Tyson, whichever flavor you like, go get me a wide receiver that can help him score some points. Fred, as always, great stuff, man. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much.
All right, Dave. Good talking to you. Thanks for having me on.
Fred Greetham, make sure you check him out. He is the senior analyst for the Orange and Brown Report. Always good and insightful Browns coverage. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. We turn our attention to the Cavs. Sam Amico, hoopswire.com, straight ahead. Stay with us.
You got so much to do. It's got you feeling blue. Put a little play in your day. 'Cause it's fun all over the state. So come on. Great games wait for you and me. The Ohio Lottery. Put a little play in your day. Put a little play in your day.
We turn our attention to the Cavaliers coming off that loss to the Lakers on the West Coast last night. Kenny Atkinson talking about his approach to having so many different starting lineups and so many guys not available because of injury.
We've tried to turn our, kind of the different lineups and different different situations we're dealing with guys out as a positive. Like, Naquan gets a lot of burn tonight. Like that's, he's a guy we might need in the playoffs. TP, with his ball handling and skill, who knows? You might need him in the playoffs. So to get these reps, it's invaluable. So sure, we got some guys out, but like I've said before, I kind of trust this roster up to 13 guys. Thomas Bryant, playoff viable. And I'm not sure I would know that if we didn't have some guys out. So I think it's going to make us a more flexible, adaptable team when the playoffs come. So look at it as a positive.
Let's welcome in Sam Amico from hoopswire.com, co-host of Full Court Cleveland. Sam, those are all true. I think it also puts a little bit more pressure on Kenny Atkinson because you got to figure out when is it time to move on from somebody in that playoff rotation.
Yeah, it probably cost him some sleepless nights because you do have situations, and I think he's right where the Cavs do pretty much go 13 deep. So, yeah, as a coach, obviously you always have to factor in injuries, how much a guy can play if he is hurt. A lot of times in the playoffs, guys will play hurt, but, is it impacting his performance? So it is good in the sense that, yes, these injuries have led to more opportunities for guys like Thomas Bryant, who I think's been really good for them, kind of the big off the bench that they need. Brings a lot of energy, can score, gets the Lakers, obviously, 14 points, led the team with 6 rebounds, which isn't a big positive, but at least he's in the mix. So, he's one of those guys. We've seen Naquan Tomlin play his way into a standard deal, Craig Porter Jr. And assuming everybody is healthy, if you can get to that point before the playoffs, everyone's healthy, then you got more decisions to make. What do we do with Jalen Tyson? What do we do with Sam Merrill? What do we do with Max Strus? You got a glut of wing players and Keon Ellis. You got to figure out who's getting the minutes in there and how impactful they can be.
So a lot's been made of the defense. What have you seen the last few games? And then with 6 games left, is there anything you can see that'll make you feel better come playoff time? Or is it just, man, we're going to find out what's happening come playoff time when the playoffs hit?
Yeah, you hope that it could be that, Dave, where you're saying, boy, we hope we shore this up, but it's very evident, this is an issue been kind of haunting them for most of the season, at least since the All-Star break. cannot keep teams off the offensive glass. That's been an issue. The intangibles that are very important. That's one of them. Keeping teams off the glass. Defense doesn't end when the shot goes up. You know, there's a lot of that is opposing shots clanking off the back of the rim or something, and then the other team going and getting what really is a loose ball as opposed to a pure rebound. They're giving up too many of those, not getting to enough loose balls. So those, free throw shooting has to improve a little bit. And these are the little intangibles that, make the difference in the playoffs. You look at teams like from last season, Oklahoma City and the Indiana Pacers, they both flourished in the intangibles. They weren't, they could score, but it was really about doing the intangibles that kills other teams' momentum. So I think that they know this. It's not a big secret. It's, you want to clean that up. You got 6 games left to clean that up and show that you're capable of doing those things. And they have shown it sometimes, but you've got to do that consistently, or the results are going to be very similar to what they were last season.
Currently 4th in the East, a game behind the Knicks. How badly do they want to stay a game behind the Knicks and avoid the Celtics in a second-round series?
I think pretty badly, I think they would just as soon stay in that 4th spot. And then you get the Pistons, who obviously would be the number 1 seed. And you think, boy, they want to face the number 1 seed in the second round. But you give Boston at the number 2 seed, if you finish 3rd, you would face them in the second round. Detroit is a very young, kind of unproven playoff opponent. That is who you would rather face in the second round. Last year the Cavs were the number 1 seed, and the Pacers were number 4. And if you look at what the Pacers were thinking, they had an easier road than the number 2 or 3 seed, even though they were 4. So because the Cavs were kind of still finding their way in the playoffs and really still are, but I just think that matchup. The Cavs match up very well with the Detroit Pistons. They don't match up very well with the Celtics. So you hope the hope would be that the Knicks and the Celtics beat up on each other in the second round before you get to the Eastern Conference Finals if you're the Cavs.
And the Cavs play pretty well on the road as well. So it'll be interesting to see. You wrote an article about James Harden, who's. When he's been on the court, the Cavs have looked significantly better. Getting ready to agree to a 2-year contract. Take us through that article and kind of what your thoughts are there.
Well, he can opt out after the season, which it sounds like that's the plan, and get a new deal. And it also sounds like that's the plan, is that he would do that and re-sign with the Cavs for another 2 years, which would mean next season and the season after. So they kind of look at it like, we are a different club in terms of having that older voice, that guy who's, going to be in the Hall of Fame someday, who really directs the flow of the offense, who's been remarkably unselfish since he's gotten to Cleveland. He's always been good assist guy, but just the way he is constantly looking for other people first, he's really helped the big guys consistently. Jared Allen's gone to another level. We've seen Evan Mobley go to another level, with the exception of the Lakers game for the 2-week stretch there when he was just out there with James Harden. So what's important to them now is getting Harden reps with both Allen and Mobley together out there on the floor. But you have to love everything you've seen from him to this point. If there's ever a problem with the team, them not rebounding, them not doing the intangibles, he's not a part of that. He's the one guy who's going out there and doing everything. And, even if he slows down a little bit, you still appreciate that aspect of his game and his leadership.
What have you thought about Max Strus? When he's on the court, what does it mean for the Cavs?
Well, first of all, he brings immediate energy. He brings that edge you're looking for. Those are the things that we've seen from Max Strus over the years. Now, he's a very streaky shooter. But that said, entering the game against the Lakers, last night he was shooting 49% on threes. So he's very dangerous. And that's what you want from a guy who's a role player, right? You want energy. You want the occasional, boy, if this guy gets hot, the other guy's in trouble. So, I mean, he really brings everything you need in a role player. He defends very hard. He's, when I mentioned some of the wing players who could potentially lose minutes in the playoffs, he's not one of them because he brings everything you need, that edge. It's almost like the Cavs made another trade after the February deadline when Strus got healthy for a guy who brings all the things they need, the intangibles, the defense, the rebounding, the outside shooting. So, and when he gets cooking, and Kenny Atkinson has said this, when Max gets going, we're going to be hard to beat. So, he truly is their X factor heading into the postseason.
All right, before I let you go, I know you wrote an article relative to LeBron James and free agency. Take us through that and your thoughts. LeBron James is playing really well.
Yeah, he's everybody will tell you since he's become comfortable. I think he's always accepted I can be number 3 option here on offense, but he's just taken him a while to get comfortable in that role. He's been very, very good in that role. Even against the Cavs. He's not going to carry you to wins anymore, but the way he played against the Cavs last night, 14 points, I think 6 assists, it's almost like James Harden. He's more of a facilitator, and then every once in a while he'll remind you he used to be LeBron James with one of those dunks or something. But listen, a lot depends on what's going to happen or what does happen in the playoffs with the Lakers. If they're, they look like a team too that's probably, if you had to predict, out in the second round. And once LeBron James gets bounced, all the drama follows. He's going to be a free agent, and I really think that the Cavs are going to be in that mix. If he's planning a farewell tour next year, what better place to do it? I think that's in the back of his mind is, it would be the farewell tour of all of them in a Cavs uniform, and I think he knows that. But he can still play. So I think if the Lakers show this playoffs, if they could get closer to a championship, then maybe he just stays there. I really think it's coming down to 2 teams in free agency, and it's all going to be determined by what happens in the playoffs for the Lakers. It's either going to be the Lakers or the Cavs for LeBron next season.
Sam Amico, as always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Sam.
Thanks for having me. We'll talk to you soon.
Sam Amico, make sure you check him out, hoopswire.com, also co-host of Full Court Cleveland. That's going to do it for this edition of Sports for CLE. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 on Sports for CLE.